Chapter 11. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Wednesday night, the 30th of August, 1939. By the time it was properly dark, the children had made up their beds in the hut. Tilly and Rosie were next to each other, and Miles was further away behind the wall at the end. Miles had worked hard to build up a roaring fire, and the potatoes were tucked into the bottom of the hottest part. "They take ages," he said, poking them with a long stick, "but nothing tastes better. I got some butter too." Rosie had brought some meat scraps for the dogs and the parrot. Tilly had some carrots for the rabbits. She opened Anthony's crate, calling out, "Here you are, my darling. I've sliced up some juicy carrot for you." Toffee and Apple were making squeaking noises and snuffling through the hay. "They sounded very hungry," she said as the sounds got louder. She started to untie the string holding the chicken wire in place. Miles came over and pulled an apple out of his pocket. Taking out a scout knife, he sliced the apple into pieces, dropping them into the cage. He threw the core away and then, that should do it." The guinea pigs were soon munching away happily, until he was amazed at how relieved she was. The responsibility for feeding the entire emergency zoo felt almost too much at times. Miles had saved a piece of apple for Domino. Tilly watched, fascinated, as the rat sat up in Miles's cupped hands and, holding the fruit between his paws, delicately nibbled away until it was all gone. "He eats as politely as Tinker Bell. Rats are very misunderstood," said Miles, dropping Domino back into his top pocket of his shirt. "They're very clean. They're really very clean, and they're enormously clever." He went off to check on the fire, and Tilly said in a quiet voice to Rosie, "Do you think Megan and Donald are suspicious about the zoo? Dad practically interrogated me at tea time about rumours of kids hiding pets near the canal." Rosie was poking a piece of fat through the bars of the parrot cage. Pirate came squawking and leant forwards. Tilly was sure he was pecking off Rosie's finger, but instead he just pulled the fat away and let it drop on the floor of the cage. Then he jumped down from his perch and started to peck away. He must be very hungry, she thought. Makes him even more bad-tempered. "They haven't said anything," said Rosie. "Megan's so much stricter than Mummy ever was. It's ridiculous. We had terrible rows when I first went to live with them. I thought she'd send me away, but Donald's nice." "Yes, he is," agreed Tilly. "And he's always saying what a good person Megan is, which I know is true, and I'm very grateful she looks after me, otherwise I'd be in an orphanage." They both shuddered at the thought. "But she doesn't really know me, Tilly," Rosie went on, her voice raising as she spoke. "Not like you do. She never reads books, and she's not at all interested in pets or finding anything about anything. Daddy and me went to the library every week. Daddy loved books as much as me." Rosie fell silent, and Tilly squeezed her arm to show that she understood how much her friend was missing her parents. It must be so awful, Tilly thought. She just couldn't imagine Mum and Dad not being there, even though they annoyed her ever so much a lot of times. The two girls stood staring into each other's eyes, their faces white in the light from the torch, and then Rosie turned away, wiping a tear from one eye. "I've got some buns," she said in a small voice. "I'll take them outside for our feast." Tilly watched her go as she shook out the scraps bag, letting Bonnie lick up the last tidbits. Then she peered into the crates, shining her torch through the chicken wire. The small pets seemed to be asleep, but they would need more food again tomorrow, and the day after that, and every day after that. Outside, the fire was roaring away, sending bright orange flames into the dark night. Tilly laid out the bag of cheese and pickle sandwiches on a blanket spread on the ground. Rosie's buns were already there, and Miles had all added the butter and a few apples. Rosie was sitting on her Mac, Tinker Bell wrapped up tight in the pink flannel, asleep in her lap. "Dear little Tinks," Rosie said, whispering. "You have a good sleep, and when you're better, we'll have some fun. I'll let you chase all the birds in the woods, I promise." Tilly laid out her Mac too and sat down, wrapping her scarf around her neck and pulling Bonnie's warm body onto her legs. The night air was getting chilly, but Bonnie didn't seem to mind. She lay with her head tucked in, eyes blinking at the campfire. "She's happy to be with me," Tilly told herself, enjoying the feeling of the thick fur through her fingers. "Me and Bonnie know each other inside out. We've always loved each other." Miles had taken his rat out of his pocket and let it run from hand to hand. It was as white as Mary's rabbit, with long grey tail and whiskers, which never stopped quivering. "Surely your parents don't care about your rat," Tilly said. "He can't exactly eat very much." Mum hates Domino, said Miles with a grin. She's delighted when she got an excuse to get rid of him, even though it means war. She thinks he's escaped from his cage, but I keep telling him he's in a little box under my bed. But I keep him in a little box under my bed. I'm going to train him to spot German spies. He'll be good at that, won't you, Domino boy? He put his nose on the tip of the rat's quivering nose. Tilly gave a sarcastic snort. Well, the Germans must be quaking in their boots. They all laughed, and then Rosie said, let's play pictures in the fire. We take it in turns to say what we can see, like a fairy tale castle and a dragon fighting a prince. Nah, said Miles, leaning forward, his face glowing red in the light and the flames. We should tell ghost stories. That's what we do at camp. Scout leader tells the best ones. I'll start. He looks like a small devil, thought Tilly, and a chill fluttered down her spine. Miles had a scout knife in a sheath hooked onto his belt. He took it out now and began to whittle away a bit of wood as he told his story. There was this man walking home, and he had to take a shortcut through a graveyard. It was a very dark night, and it was raining, and he heard a horse and cart come up behind him. In a graveyard? How stupid, said Rosie, stroking Tinkerbell's fluffy ear. You're stupid, said Miles. How else can they take dead people in their coffins to their graves? You ever lifted a coffin? Hardly, said Rosie in her Megan voice. Tilly snickered and said, Go on anyway. So the man stops and waits for the cart and calls up. Can you give me a lift? Said Miles, making his voice as ghostly as possible. The cart driver had a big cloak on with hoods up against the rain, but he nods, so the man gets on and they go off. The man starts to tell our driver he's heard from the village people that the graveyard's haunted. Miles stopped and made ghostly noises, which sounded more like fog with a cough, thought Tilly. She threw an acorn at him, and the girls laughed. Then Rosie said, Shh, listen, what's that? They fell silent. At first all they could hear was a rustling between the trees, like a small animal or bird snuffling around. And then, clear as a bell, from the direction of the stream in the woods, came the hooting of an owl. It stopped and then started again. My first real owl, said Rosie in a hushed voice. I wish we could stay here forever, said Miles. My school's being evacuated on Tuesday, and my partner's Stephen Fuller. He's a complete nincompoop. Tilly and Rosie fell about laughing as if that was that word again, and when Miles said in a huff, Shall I finish the story or not? Oh, go on, said Tilly. Might as well. Well, the cart driver didn't speak, and the man goes on about how the villagers had seen a tall figure walking around the graveyard at night, a figure with no face. What do you mean, no face? Said Tilly. Miles's eyes narrowed as he leaned towards them, his face glowing red, blood red in the firelight, and hissed, No eyes, no nose, no mouth, no hair, just dead white skin. Rosie gasped and shot Tilly a look, and then Miles said, What do you think the cart driver said? What? Whispered Tilly. Miles gave a creepy laugh and said, The driver turned to the man, lifted his hood and said, You mean like me? He broke into a cackling scream and bashed the fire until the air glowed with sparks. Tilly's hand flew to her mouth and Rosie bent over Tinkerbell. The roar went up behind them and crash came through the undergrowth. Oh, God, faceless man's coming, thought Tilly in terror. But it was Neville, thundering towards them, with Sydney close behind. They tore up to the fire, leaping off their bikes and let them drop onto the grass. Got any food, Tilly? Panted Sydney. I'm starving. Tilly let out a laugh of relief and said, What on earth are you doing here? What did you tell your parents? You'd better not have given the emergency zoo away. Course not. Keep your hair on, growled Neville. My dad's working nights and Mum's asleep with the baby and Pam. They don't know anything about what we're going to tell them, eh, Sid? You can trust us, said Sydney, who had already rummaged through the packages on the blanket. Cool, blimey, cheese sandwiches. He leant back on his knees, his thin face turned up towards Tilly, and she could see the hunger raging in his eyes. Didn't you have any tea? She said. We ain't had nothing kept a slice of bread and Marge this morning, said Sydney. Neville shoved him so hard he nearly fell in the fire. What you telling that for? Aren't no one's business like Dad says? Neville's face had gone red with shame, and he pretended to rummage in his pocket for something, but Tilly could see he was full of holes and there was nothing there. The food's for sharing, said Rosie, saving the day with her Megan voice. Tilly handed around the sandwiches. There was enough for one each and one left over, which she quietly gave to Sydney. He took it, tore it in half, and gave one piece to his brother. Neville hesitated and then, still looking down, took it and stuffed it into his mouth. After that, Tilly gave everyone 2 apples and a bun each. "Doesn't everything taste wonderful outside?" said Rosie, as they all grunted with agreement, mouths full. "But I'm still hungry," moaned Sidney, clutching his stomach and rolling around on the grass. "This was just the first course," said Tilly. "We've got potatoes roasting in the fire, and they're ready. Are they ready yet, Mars?" Sidney gave a loud whoop and threw himself to his feet. Spreading out his arms, he turned into a fighter plane, racing around the fire, rat-tat-tat-tat like a machine gun. Mars pulled a potato out of the ashes and sliced it open with a knife. "Perfect," he pronounced, and rolled the rest out onto the grass. He sliced potatoes for everyone, dropping knobs of butter into the centre. The children burnt their mouths and hands as they ate, stopping only to gasp how delicious they were. "This is the best dinner I ever had," pronounced Sidney, his chin dripping butter and his mouth black from the charred potato skins. When the food had gone and the fire began to die down, Neville said, "Any sign of Connor and Bill?" "No fear," said Mars. "We'll give them what they had come round here." "Me and Nev reckoned you need some more men," said Sidney. "Thank you very much," said Rosie in a megan voice. "After all, me and Tilly are only girls." Tilly snorted and they rolled their eyes at each other. The boys ducked their heads and Mars threw some more twigs into the fire. It flared up and Tilly put out her hands. She shivered a little and for a moment thought her warm bed of home, her mum and dad murmuring in the living room below her bedroom. Rosie says, as if reading her thoughts, "Why don't we put out the fire and all go to bed?" Sidney gave a yawn and went out to Neville's bike. He pulled over a couple of sacks from the basket. Len next door gave us some. Says he'd keep 'em right nice and warm when he goes fruit picking in Kent. They sleep out in the orchards. They all went inside. Sidney and Neville lay down under their sacks next to Mars's blanket, in the boys' room, as Rosie dubbed it. Tilly pulled Bonnie over her blanket and, for the first time that week, settled down to sleep with Bonnie's soft, warm body against her legs, just like at home. Rosie made a cushion out of the coat and laid the sleeping Tinkerbell next to her, kissing the soft fur behind her ear. "This has been the best night of my life," she whispered to Tilly. "Absolutely," said Tilly. "I don't want to go home." "Me neither." Pirate gave a sleepy squawk of agreement and Hanno seemed to yap back in his dreams. Bonnie changed the positions of Tilly's legs a couple of times, making herself properly comfortable. There was an earthy, musty smell in the shed, partly from the caged animals and partly from the crumbling walls and mud floor. Tilly snuggled under her blanket, feeling very cosy now that she could have Bonnie on her legs again. There were all sorts of tiny noises coming from the small pets in the cages. Miles called out, 2 points if you guess what animal from the sounds. "You're on," called back Tilly and Rosie together, and then they both giggled. "Quiet!" Tilly held her breath, and in the silence they could hear snuffling. "Guinea pig," said Sidney. "Got to say the name." "Don't know the blimmin' names." "That's Toffee," said Rosie. 2 points to the girls, cried out Tilly, and shouts of "Not fair" came from the boys' corner. "Do snakes make any noises?" whispered Tilly and Rosie. "No." Pirate gave a loud squawk. "Pirate!" yelled Sidney. 2 points! They were quiet for a couple of minutes, and then Hanno gave a yap and Pirate squawked back. Like lightning, Rosie said in her clear voice, "That's Hanno," followed by Pirate. 4 points. The girls win. More shouts and jeers from the boys' corner, and then everyone seemed to agree that it was time to fall asleep. Tilly could feel her eyes closing. She was sure all the boys were asleep and at least one of them was snoring. "I never imagined I would spend the night in a zoo," she whispered to Rosie. "What totally amazing fun. I wish we could stay here forever and let the grown-ups have their stupid war a long way away." Agreed. They slipped off to sleep with the sound of the owl hooting in the woods. In her dreams, Tilly was walking with Bonnie into the hut. She could smell smoke and she told Bonnie that Sidney was cooking a big dinner for everyone. When Tilly looked down, her little dog had no eyes. Then a blood-curdling scream split the air. "It's the man with no face!" screamed Tilly, fully awake now, and Rosie sat bolt upright, Tinkerbell in her arms.